The human walked slowly through the crowded galactic station, his boots clicking against the polished metal floor. Yet no one seemed to notice him, and he felt like a shadow drifting among beings of every shape and size. Traders shouted their offers. In alien tongues, starship crews laughed together over shared meals, and families held hands as they moved through the bright corridors. But he moved alone, carrying only the weight of silence in his chest and a dull ache in his heart since leaving Earth. He had not found a place that felt like home, and though he had seen wonders across the stars, he had never felt more empty. He paused near a large viewport where stars glittered like dust scattered across black velvet, and for a moment he simply stared, letting the cold beauty of space wash over him. It reminded him of all he had lost, the people left behind, the warmth of voices that no longer called his name, the touch of family that was gone with the wars that had swept across his homeworld. He leaned forward, resting a hand against the transparent surface, and whispered to himself that perhaps this was what his life had become. An endless wandering without purpose, without ties, without love. A small voice broke the silence, and he turned, startled to see a little girl staring up at him. She could not have been older than 7. Her wide, luminous eyes marked her as belonging to one of the gentle alien species who lived on the station. Her skin shimmered faintly in the light, and her small hands clutched a stuffed toy shaped like a star beast. She tilted her head and asked, "Why do you look so lonely?" Her words were soft but carried an innocent strength that pierced straight through the wall he had built around his heart. He blinked, uncertain how to answer. No one had spoken to him with such directness in a long time, and for a moment he almost laughed at the strange situation. A human soldier hardened by war, reduced to silence by the question of a child. He tried to shrug, but the girl would not let him hide. She tugged at his sleeve and said, "You should not be alone. My mom is the kindest person. You should marry her. Then you will not be lonely anymore." The words struck him like a shock. He almost thought he had misheard, but the girl only smiled with perfect certainty, her small voice echoing in his ears. "Marry my mom. She is kindest, and she can make you happy again." He knelt down to her level, feeling both foolish and moved beyond reason, and asked softly, "And where is your mother?" The girl beamed, proud of her boldness, and took his hand with trust as if she had already decided who he was in her world. She led him through the station, weaving between crowds, her small figure pulling him along while he followed. In silence, still reeling from what she had said, he thought of how absurd it was, a stranger guided by a child towards someone he had never met. Yet part of him felt alive for the first time in years, her innocent confidence stirring something long, buried hope, curiosity, even a fragile spark of warmth that he had thought was gone forever. When they reached a quiet corner of the marketplace, the girl pointed to a tall woman arranging goods on a stall. Her movements graceful but weary, her skin carried the same faint shimmer as the child, and her eyes, when she lifted them, were filled with strength, but also shadows of sorrow. The mother looked up, surprised to see her daughter leading a human by the hand. The girl declared with fearless joy, "This is the man I told you about. He is lonely and he should marry you." The woman froze, her expression caught between shock and embarrassment. But in her gaze there was no harshness, only patience, and the faintest trace of curiosity. The human felt words choke in his throat, uncertain what to say or do under her calm regard. Yet in that moment something shifted within him. For the first time in so long, he was seen not as a wanderer, not as a soldier, not as a human among aliens, but simply as someone standing before another soul. Perhaps this was the beginning of something he had never dared to imagine. The mother looked at her daughter with gentle reproach, her voice calm as she asked, "What is this? You bring a stranger here and speak." Such bold words. The little girl clutched her toy tighter, but her eyes shone with determination. She said, "He is lonely, and I thought you could help him because you are kindest." The woman sighed and shook her head, yet there was a softness in her tone when she replied, "Children should not speak of such things, but thank you for thinking of me." The human felt awkward, standing there like an intruder, yet he bowed his head slightly and said, "Forgive her. She only wished to help. I did not mean to trouble you." The woman studied him for a moment, her gaze steady and not unkind. She could sense his discomfort, but also the honesty in his words. She finally gave a small nod and said, "My daughter has always had a bold heart. She sees things others. Miss, I am Lyra, and this is my daughter, Celine. May I know your name?" He hesitated as if remembering it after years of silence before answering Daniel. Her name lingered in his ears, soft and strange, yet comforting. And when she spoke his name, it felt almost like home. They stood by the stall while Celine eagerly introduced them again as if words could bind two strangers into something greater. Lyra smiled faintly. Though her eyes carried the weight of many burdens, she asked Daniel what brought him to this station. He explained in quiet words that he was only passing through, that he traveled from place to place without destination. She tilted her head and said, "Then, you carry no roots and no ties. Perhaps that is why my daughter saw loneliness in you." Daniel had no reply for a long time until he said softly, "She was not wrong." Celine tugged his hand and insisted he sit with them for a meal. Lyra at first resisted, but seeing her daughter's excitement, she relented, and soon they were seated. At a small corner table near their stall, the food was simple, warm bread-like rounds and a stew of spiced vegetables. Daniel tasted it and was surprised by the gentle flavor. After so many days of ration packs, the warmth filled him more than the meal itself, and he found himself speaking more freely. He told them of Earth without dwelling on the wars, but instead on the green forests, the blue oceans, and the songs of birds. Celane's eyes widened with wonder, and she begged him to tell more. Lyra listened quietly, her gaze softening as his voice painted pictures of a world she had never seen. Hours passed unnoticed as conversation flowed. Celine laughed at his stories, and even Lyra allowed a smile to touch her lips from time to time. Daniel felt the emptiness inside him ease just slightly, as if cracks had opened and light seeped through. He realized he had not laughed in years until this child and her mother pulled it from him without effort when he rose to leave. Celine clung to his arm and begged that he visit again. Lyra looked hesitant, but after a pause she said quietly, "You may join us if you wish. It would please her, and perhaps it would ease your loneliness." Daniel felt something stir inside him. Gratitude, hope, a fragile sense of belonging. The following days he found himself drawn back to their stall again and again. Sometimes he helped Lyra carry goods from the docks. Sometimes he sat with Celine, teaching her simple human games like stacking stones into towers or drawing shapes on scrap pieces of cloth. The child adored every moment, and her laughter filled the air like music that healed old scars. Lyra watched often with guarded eyes, but gradually she let her caution slip, seeing that Daniel brought no harm, only kindness. He treated her daughter with patience and respect, and slowly she began to speak with him more openly. One evening, as the marketplace grew quiet, Lyra sat beside him and asked why he truly wandered so far. Daniel hesitated before telling her of his past, of battles fought, of comrades lost, and of a homeworld scarred by endless conflict. He spoke not with pride, but with sorrow, and when he finished, silence stretched between them. Lyra lowered her eyes and admitted her husband had died in raids, leaving her to raise Celine alone. Their grief, though shaped by different wars, was the same, and in that shared pain they found a fragile connection. Celine returned at that moment, running with excitement and holding a small flower she had found in the station's hydroponic garden. She pressed it into Daniel's hand and said, "Now you will not be lonely, because we gave you something that lives." Daniel closed his fingers gently around the delicate stem, his throat tight with emotion, and Lyra watched him closely, her guarded heart unsettled by the way her daughter trusted him so completely. Yet deep inside, she too felt a shift, as if the walls she had built were beginning to crack. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel found himself returning to the stall almost every day, though he told himself it was only to help with carrying goods or to share stories with Celine. He knew deep inside that something more was pulling him back. The laughter of the child reminded him of the sound of his sister long ago, and the calm strength of Lyra brought a warmth he had not felt since before the wars. The emptiness that had followed him across the stars was slowly being replaced by something unfamiliar, yet welcome. The marketplace had begun to notice his presence. Whispers followed him as he passed by. Some were harmless curiosity, but others carried distrust. Humans were rare on this side of the galaxy, and his rugged appearance, scarred by old battles, made him stand out among the more graceful forms of the station dwellers. Lyra noticed the stares, and once she asked him if they troubled him, Daniel shook his head and said he had grown used to it long ago. She frowned, but said no more, though she kept her watchful eyes on those who whispered. Celine, on the other hand, paid no mind to any of it. She would run to him every time with open arms, tugging him to join her games or to tell her another story. She once begged him to teach her how humans built campfires. Even though there were no open flames allowed in the station, he improvised with a circle of stones and a small glow lamp. And when she clapped her hands in joy, Daniel felt something inside his chest ache with bittersweet happiness. Lyra watched from a distance that evening. Her lips curved in a faint smile before she turned away as if hiding it. Daniel and Lyra began to talk more when Celine was asleep. At night they would sit near the viewport where stars shimmered and share fragments of themselves. Lyra spoke of her world once lush with oceans before raiders stripped it of resources. She told him of the struggles of raising Celine alone and the endless work to keep her safe. Daniel listened with respect, never offering empty comfort but simply being present, and in return he spoke of the comrades he had lost on forgotten battlefields, of the guilt that followed him, of the feeling that he had no place left to belong in those moments. Silence often lingered between them, yet it was not empty. It was a silence that held meaning. One evening, an elder of the marketplace approached Lyra after Daniel had helped carry supplies. The elder spoke in a low voice, but Daniel caught enough to understand the warning: humans bring trouble, the past has shown us that do not let him too close. Lyra's face hardened. Though she remained respectful, she replied that Daniel had done nothing but show kindness, and that her daughter trusted him more than anyone. She herself did not fear his presence. The elder left with a disapproving glance, and Daniel turned to go, feeling shame heavy in his chest, but Lyra stopped him with a firm hand on his arm and said, "You have done nothing wrong. Do not let their prejudice decide who you are." That night Daniel could not sleep. He replayed her words again and again. Her defense of him stirred emotions he thought he had buried. He realized he was no longer drifting alone. He had become part of something fragile and precious, and the thought terrified him. For the first time in years, he had something to lose. Celine seemed to sense the weight pressing on him, for she climbed into his lap the next day without a word and pressed her forehead against his chest. She whispered softly, "You are family now." And even though her words were simple, they carried a truth he could not deny. Daniel's arms wrapped around her almost without thought, and when he looked up, he found Lyra watching with an unreadable expression, her eyes glistening as if caught between fear and hope. From that moment, the bond was no longer hidden. It was plain for all to see. The human and the alien, mother and child, walked together through the station. They ate together, they laughed together, and though the whispers did not cease, their strength grew in the small moments of trust and care. Daniel knew the path ahead would not be simple yet. For the first time, he also knew he did not want to walk it alone. The days of quiet routine slowly gave way to nights of deeper conversations, as Daniel and Lyra found themselves sharing pieces of their past that were too heavy to speak of during the light of day. When Celine was asleep, and the marketplace had gone silent, they would sit together near the viewport watching the endless stars stretch across the dark, and it was there that Lyra finally told him the story she had carried for years. Her voice steady, but her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. She told him of the raids that had come without warning, tearing through her people with no mercy. She spoke of her husband who had stood against them and had fallen, leaving her with a child still learning to walk. She told of the nights when Celine cried for her father, and she could only hold her tight, praying for strength. She confessed that sometimes she felt her heart had hardened into stone, so that she could keep moving forward for the sake of her daughter. Daniel listened without interruption, his gaze never leaving her face. And though she did not weep, he saw the pain written deep in her eyes. When she finished, Daniel was silent for a long time before he finally spoke. He told her of Earth, and how the wars had devoured everything he loved. He described the smoke-filled skies, the endless marches of soldiers, the moments when hope had flickered and died, and the hollow silence that followed when his family was gone. He admitted that he had wandered the stars because he could not face the ghosts of his past, and that every station, every world, felt like a reminder of what he had lost. Lyra listened as he had listened to her, and when he fell silent, she placed her hand lightly over his, as if to say she understood. That night, something shifted between them. It was not spoken in words yet. It was clear in the way their silences grew softer, less heavy and filled with unspoken trust the next morning. When Selene skipped happily between them, she seemed to sense it too. Her laughter brighter than usual, her small hands reaching for both of theirs as if she had already decided that this was how it should be. But not everyone shared her innocence. The whispers in the marketplace grew louder. Some customers avoided Lyra's stall, and others muttered warnings when Daniel passed by. One evening, a group of traders stopped him, their voices sharp with suspicion. They asked what a human was doing lingering so long among them, what his true purpose was. Daniel kept his calm and answered simply that he was only helping and that he meant no harm. But their glares told him that words would not erase their fear. Lyra heard of the confrontation later, and she clenched her jaw, her patience tested, yet she did not waver. She told Daniel that prejudice was nothing new to her kind, and that strength came not from fighting back but from standing firm. Selene, however, responded differently. When she heard whispers, she would stand with her small shoulders squared, declaring loudly that Daniel was family, and that anyone who spoke against him was wrong. Her courage made even the harshest voices falter, and Daniel felt both pride and sorrow for the child who defended him with such fire. Despite the shadows pressing in around them, the bond between Daniel and Lyra deepened. He helped her with long tasks late into the night, carrying heavy loads, repairing broken equipment, and standing watch when trouble stirred in the streets. Lyra began to smile more often, though her smiles were small and fleeting. Daniel noticed them all, and they became a light to him, a reminder that even in a world of suspicion, warmth could still grow. One evening after a long day of work, Lyra brought him a simple meal, and they sat together in silence until she finally spoke. She told him that she feared not for herself but for Selene, and that if others turned against them, she did not know how to shield her daughter from the pain. Daniel looked at her with steady eyes and said, "Then I will shield her with you." The words were simple, yet heavy, with promise, and in that moment Lyra knew that he meant every syllable. As they sat together with the stars beyond the glass, Lyra let her hand rest in his, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something other than grief. Daniel felt the warmth of her touch, and though he did not say it aloud, he understood that the walls around both their hearts were crumbling, not through grand gestures, but through small moments of trust and courage, slowly building into something stronger than either of them had expected. The bond that had grown between Daniel, Lyra, and Selene could no longer be hidden from the eyes of the station. Their small world of shared meals and late-night conversations was becoming something that even strangers noticed. Whispers turned into accusations, and soon it was no longer only the traders who muttered against Daniel. It was the voices of authority, the council of elders who governed the marketplace. They summoned Lyra to speak before them, and Daniel stood outside the chamber knowing he had no right to step within, but his chest heavy with dread. Inside the chamber, Lyra faced a semicircle of elders, their expressions hard and their voices sharp. They questioned her about the human who had been seen so often at her stall. They asked why she allowed him near her daughter, why she welcomed him into her home, when history had shown that humans brought only conflict. Lyra stood tall. Though her hands trembled beneath her robes, she answered firmly that Daniel had done nothing but show kindness, that he worked beside her without asking for reward, that he treated Selene with more patience than anyone had before. She told them that his presence was not a threat, but a gift, a chance for her daughter to feel joy. The elders were unmoved. They warned her that association with a human could bring danger to her household and unrest to the station. They spoke of old wounds and past wars, of treaties broken and trust shattered. They reminded her that one human could never change what history had written. But before she could respond, Selene slipped into the chamber unnoticed. She had followed her mother quietly, and now she stood before the elders with her small hands clenched tight. Her voice rang out with surprising strength as she declared, "Daniel is our family. He is not dangerous. He is my friend and my protector." The chamber fell silent at the child's boldness, The elders tried to silence her, but Celine refused. Her eyes shone with tears, yet her voice did not waver. She told them that Daniel made her laugh when she felt lonely, that he listened when she was afraid, that he never spoke harshly, and never turned her away. She said that if they could not see his kindness, then they were blind. Her final words pierced the stillness when she said, "If you take him away, you will take my family away." Lyra rushed forward to hold her daughter, her own heart. Torn between fear and pride, the elders exchanged uneasy glances, some of their stern expressions softening at the sight of the child's courage. Finally, one of the oldest among them sighed heavily and said, "We will not forbid your choice, but do not expect our blessing." Their decision was not approval, but it was enough. The council dismissed them, and Lyra walked out with Celine in her arms. Daniel rose to meet them, his eyes searching Lyra's face. She gave a small nod and whispered, "They will not stop us." From that day, tension hung in the air. When Daniel walked through the marketplace, some turned away. Others stared with open suspicion, but there were also a few who watched quietly, their expressions not hostile but thoughtful, as if the child's words had planted a seed of doubt. Celine remained fearless. She would hold Daniel's hand proudly in public, her laughter a shield against the disapproval of others, and her certainty became the foundation upon which Lyra and Daniel found strength. At night, when the noise of the station faded, Daniel and Lyra spoke more openly of what they feared. He confessed that he worried his presence would bring danger upon them. She admitted that she feared the same, yet she also confessed that she could not imagine sending him away, not after all that had grown between them. Daniel looked at her and, for the first time, allowed himself to admit what had long been stirring in his heart, that her kindness and her strength had given him reason to keep living. The following morning, when Daniel arrived at the stall, Lyra placed a hand on his arm and looked at him with eyes both weary and resolute. She said, "Whatever comes, we will face it together. You are not alone anymore." Her words echoed within him, breaking through the last of the walls he had carried for years. And when Celine ran to join them, tugging both their hands into hers, Daniel knew that no matter how others judged them, he had found something greater than acceptance. He had found a family. The days of uneasy peace did not last long, for shadows returned to the station as whispers of raiders spread through the markets. The same marauders who had once taken Lyra's husband were rumored to be moving again. Slipping past patrols and striking vulnerable outposts, Daniel felt the air grow tense. The soldiers at the docks doubled their guard, and merchants whispered nervously about leaving before the threat arrived. Lyra tried to continue her work at the stall, but Daniel could see the worry hidden in her eyes. She had lived through raids before, and the thought of it returning made her hold Celine a little closer each night. Daniel's instincts sharpened with the change he had known war too long not to recognize the signs. He began checking routes through the station, studying weak points in the walls, and keeping a careful eye on exits. When Lyra asked why he spent his nights pacing, he simply answered, "Because I have seen this before, and I will not let it take you too." Lyra wanted to believe the station guard would be enough, but when she looked into Daniel's eyes, she saw a man who had survived by never trusting chance. The attack came in the middle of a restless night. Alarms blared across the station. The ground trembled with the impact of explosions, and the air filled with the cries of frightened citizens. Daniel was already awake. His body tense before the first blast, he pulled on his gear and raced to Lyra's quarters, where she clutched Celine in fear. The door shook with distant tremors, and Daniel's voice cut through the chaos, "Stay close to me and do not let go." They moved quickly through the corridors, lit red by emergency lights. Celine's small hand gripped Daniel's as tightly as she could, while Lyra followed, her face pale but determined, ahead of them. Raiders burst through the marketplace, their weapons cutting through stalls and scattering civilians. Daniel reacted without hesitation, his body moving with the precision of old training. He grabbed a length of metal piping and used it with deadly skill, striking down the first attacker before the raider even realized a human stood in his path. The sight of him fighting stirred shock among those who watched. The whispers of distrust were forgotten as they saw him protect the very people who had doubted him. He shielded Lyra and Celine, guiding them through the chaos while fending off attackers with a ferocity that came not from rage but from a desperate promise to keep them safe. Each move was sharp and exact, each strike measured by years of survival. He did not fight for glory. He fought for the life that had begun to mean more to him than his own. At one point, a raider broke through, the crowd lunging toward Lyra. Daniel saw the flash of the weapon and threw himself forward, his arm catching the strike. Meant for her pain burned through him, but he refused to falter. With a roar that echoed through the chamber, he forced the raider back until others joined to finish the fight. Lyra caught his arm, her voice shaking. "You are hurt." But Daniel shook his head and said, "It does not matter as long as you are safe." Together they reached the docking bays where guards were forming defensive lines. Daniel's knowledge of tactics proved invaluable. He shouted orders showing them where to reinforce, where to block entry points. His leadership turned panic into defense, and soon the raiders were pushed back, though many had fallen in the clash. When silence finally returned, the marketplace lay in ruins, smoke rising from shattered stalls and walls. But the people who survived looked at Daniel with new eyes, not as an outsider, not as a human to be feared, but as the man who had stood between them and death. Celine clung to him, her tears soaking his shoulder as she whispered, "I knew you would protect us." Lyra stood beside him, her gaze steady though her hands trembled. She saw the blood on his arm and the exhaustion in his stance. But more than that, she saw the truth that he had fought not only for survival but for her and her daughter Daniel. Met her eyes, and in that silent exchange everything was spoken without words. That night, as the station repaired its wounds and the people whispered of the battle, Daniel sat quietly with Celine sleeping against his chest. Lyra placed a cloth over his wounded arm and said softly, "You nearly gave your life for us." Why, Daniel's answer was simple: "Because you are my family, and I cannot lose you." His words carried no hesitation, and when Lyra lowered her head, resting it lightly against his shoulder, she knew at last that what had begun with the innocent words of a child had grown into something unshakable. The days after, the raid were filled with rebuilding. The marketplace smelled of smoke and dust, and broken pieces of stalls were scattered like bones across the floor. Yet there was also life. People worked side by side, repairing what had been lost. Voices that once spoke in suspicion now carried gratitude every time Daniel walked through the station. Eyes followed him not with distrust, but with respect. Some even nodded in thanks. For the first time he felt that he was not only passing through, he was standing in a place where he belonged. Celine was never far from his side. She carried her toy beast under one arm and clung to his hand with the other as if afraid he might vanish. Lyra too stayed close, and though she was weary, her gaze was softer. Now each time their eyes met, Daniel felt the weight of unspoken words resting between them. Words that did not need to be rushed for. They already lived in every small action she shared with him. One evening the council called for a gathering of the marketplace people, filled the central hall, murmuring with curiosity. Daniel stood with Lyra and Celine, his body tense, not knowing what to expect. The eldest of the council stepped forward, his voice echoing through the chamber. He spoke of the raid and of those who had fought to defend the station. He said that courage could not be denied, no matter the form it took, and that though history had painted humans with shadows, this one had proven himself different. The elder turned his gaze to Daniel and said, "The station owes you thanks. You stood where others might have fled you, defended those who doubted you, and you fought not for reward but for the lives beside you. We cannot ignore such truth. Though distrust may linger today, we accept you among us." Daniel bowed his head, humbled by the words, but before he could speak, Celane's voice rang out clear and bright as she declared, "He was already part of us. He is my family." The crowd rippled with quiet laughter at the child's boldness, but her words struck deeper than any speech, for it had been her innocence that had first broken walls, and now it was her certainty that bound them. Daniel looked down at her and felt his heart swell with pride. Then he looked at Lyra, who met his gaze without hesitation, and in that moment he knew the path ahead would no longer be walked alone. Life slowly returned to rhythm, though different than before. Daniel no longer drifted aimlessly. He worked beside Lyra, repairing her stall, carrying goods from the docks, teaching Celine small lessons about human ways, and listening as she taught him words of her own language. Laughter became as common as breath in their small home. Nights were filled not with silence but with warmth. as the three of them shared meals and stories under the glow of the station lights. One quiet evening, Lyra and Daniel sat side by side watching Celine sleep, her small chest rising and falling in peace. Lyra turned to him and whispered, "Your presence has changed everything." Daniel answered softly, "It was your daughter's words that changed me. She showed me that even a lonely heart could find a place again." Lyra's eyes glistened with unspoken feeling, and she reached for his hand this time, without hesitation. Their fingers intertwined, and no words were needed to seal the truth that had grown between them. Time passed and the scars of the raid began to fade, but the bond they shared only deepened. People no longer whispered against them. Instead, some even sought Daniel's help in guarding the station. Others greeted him as a neighbor. The loneliness that once haunted him was gone, replaced by the steady warmth of belonging. He had become protector, partner, and father all in one. And he knew this was where his wandering ended. Celine would often repeat her first, bold declaration to anyone who asked how they became a family. She would laugh and say, "I told him to marry my mom because she is the kindest, and now he is ours." Daniel would smile at her words, for they were simple and innocent, yet truer than anything he had ever known. He had come to the stars with nothing but sorrow and found everything he needed in the trust of a child and the strength of her mother. For the first time in years, Daniel looked at the stars, not as a reminder of what he had lost, but as a promise of what he had found, a future not shaped by loneliness but by love. And together with Lyra and Celine, he knew that wherever they went they would walk as one family, bound not by blood, but by choice. And by courage. The station grew, quieter in the weeks that followed, though the scars of the raid still marked the walls and the memories still lingered. The air carried a new strength. People moved with purpose, and their voices carried less fear. For they had survived together, and in that survival, they had found a new bond. Daniel walked among them no longer as a wanderer, but as someone who had earned his place. His steps were steady, and his heart lighter than it had been in many years. Celine never let go of his side. She clutched his hand with the certainty of a child who believed the world could be shaped by her words. She often told strangers, "This is my family, this is my protector." And each time she said it, Daniel felt the weight of his old loneliness crumble further until only warmth remained. Lyra too walked beside him, her expression calm and filled with quiet pride. Her strength no longer carried alone, for Daniel had taken part of it upon himself. The whispers of doubt had turned into words of respect. The same voices that once spoke against him now nodded in greeting, and even those who still held fear in their eyes could no longer deny what they had seen. For when danger came, it was Daniel who had stood at the front, and when the smoke cleared, it was Lyra and Celine who stood by his side together as one. Nights were different now, gone were the silences filled with sorrow. Instead, there were evenings of shared meals, laughter and stories that stretched long after the lights dimmed. Celine would fall asleep on his chest, her small breath steady, while Lyra sat close, her presence as constant as the stars beyond the viewport. In those quiet moments, Daniel realized that the endless wandering had ended, not because the stars had changed, but because he had found a reason to stop drifting. Lyra told him one evening while Celine slept that she no longer dreamed of what she had lost, but of what she had found. Daniel listened and placed his hand over hers, saying softly, "I once thought I would never have a home again, but I was wrong, because home is here with you and with her." She looked into his eyes, and in that stillness there was no need for further words. Their bond had already been written in every choice they had made. The people of the station began to rebuild their marketplace stronger than before, and Daniel worked side by side with them each day. His past as a soldier had been forged in destruction, but here, his hands found purpose in creating. Instead, he carried heavy beams, he repaired broken walls. He stood guard when new threats loomed, and each task reminded him that life was more than survival. It was about building something worth protecting. Celine often skipped ahead through the rebuilt stalls, her laughter ringing out as she repeated the words that had begun it all. She would tell anyone who listened that she had once told a lonely man to marry her mother, because she was the kindest, and he had listened, and because of that, They were no longer. Alone, Daniel would smile and Lyra would laugh softly, and in that laughter he felt the universe itself shift into something brighter. The man who had come to the stars with only sorrow now walked with a family at his side, his scars still marked him, but they no longer defined him. And when he looked into Lyra's eyes and felt Celine's small hand in his, he knew that his journey was no longer about escaping the past. It was about living the future together, and so in the endless vastness of space where stars burned and worlds turned, a human once lost had found his place not through war, not through glory, but through love and trust, and the innocent words of a child, the end.